Wow, the Dropout is seriously ramping up, and I cannot wait to see the last 3 episodes. There is so much to talk about from this last episode, episode 5, Flower of Life. So, we're going to get right into what the Dropout got wrong, what they got right, what they changed, and what they omitted, because I think there's a few people who are rewriting history a little bit. So we're going to get right into all of that. And I'm going to break this down top 10 style just to stay organized. So I'm going to start out talking about Elizabeth, of course. And in this episode, there's a lot of things that happen. And Elizabeth has this moment with Sunny and later with her mom, where apparently she is second guessing herself and talking about, what if we stopped, what if we dissolved the company, what if I stepped away. And I think this was just made up for dramatic reasons for the show, because not only is there no indication of that, and actually there's a counter argument for it, because what happened was, this is set in 2013, this episode. In 2014 was when all the Fortune cover came out and all the other magazines, the Time, top 30 under 30. It seriously, she was ramping up even more. And that just, you wouldn't do that if you were second guessing what you were doing and having some sort of, humanity and saying, oh, I'm making all these millions and don't have any technology and I'm lying. So I think that was just made up for the show. And we also have some big points in this episode where we get the story of Elizabeth's uncle who passed away, and relatives of hers, I'm not sure which ones because they were only cited as relatives, said that they found this really strange when she started telling this story, because she was never close to the uncle. And Elizabeth Holmes told this story millions, so maybe not millions, but thousands of times. She told this at TED. So many places she told this story. I'll actually insert a clip of just showing you how many examples there even are.
I grew up spending summers and the holidays with my uncle. I remember how much skin cancer, and then actually he has brain cancer. And actually, I never got to think about it. When you look at it in the context of some of the renewable solutions, because of what we had access to those.
And we also saw in this episode where Sunny and Elizabeth are doing these kind of like pump up meetings, and they just, they're so cringe. And whenever they were doing these meetings, a lot of the time they were talking about Quest and LabCorp, which are the two huge companies. I'm sure any American viewer knows that these are the two big boys in the lab industry in America. Pretty much all lab testing, I think it's like 90% or maybe 95% of all lab testing goes through Quest or LabCorp. So normally they were like, fuck you, Quest or LabCorp.
2, 3. Fuck you!
But when John Carreyrou from the Wall Street Journal, Bad Blood, all that, when he was investigating them, they used to have these meetings, and Sunny used to end the meeting with everybody cheering, fuck you, Carreyrou. So kind of unfortunate that his name rhymed, but he got his own back on them for sure.
That's right. We did it.
Speaking of Sunny, we see Sunny mentioning a few times to Elizabeth, like, don't you think, why are you focusing on brand? You need to pull back a little bit. And this is actually true, because when Elizabeth Holmes was on trial recently, we got to see a lot of text messages, and they are so cringy. Like, they are, oh my god, some of the things that they said to each other, I'd be more embarrassed about this text messages than being on trial for fraud. No, I'm joking, but they're pretty bad. And Sunny does say to her a lot, like, are you sure you should be doing all this press? And are you sure that this is, maybe you should stop doing all this and like focus on what's going on here? And that is why Sonny's awful, and he clearly is not a good person, and he is guilty as well for going along with all this. But I do have a speck of respect for him, because at least he said something to her. I mean, it didn't really go anywhere, but when it's between the two of them, there's just a tiny speck for Sonny, but that's it. So some of the things that were changed, and I think these people are rewriting history a little bit, is the advertising firm Chiat Day, or their proper name is TBWA, Chiat Day, and they have a great reputation, as they said in the show. They did the Mac ads and they did a lot of work for Apple. But when they were partnered up with Theranos, which was unusual to begin with, because it's very rare for a startup to use a big, expensive firm like that, because you're a startup. And there was actually one of the directors there, Patrick ONeill. He is in the HBO documentary, and a lot of the people that were in that documentary are not in the show. So I wonder if there's some sort of like, contract that because they were in that, they might have signed something that goes, or they also could have signed something that they just gave their story and that gets them out of being cast or something like that. But there's definitely something else going on here, because Patrick ONeill basically did everything. He was the Theranos person, and he was Elizabeth Holmes's biggest cheerleader. He thought she could do no wrong. He thought she was amazing, and he even put up with all their secrecy bullshit. Like whenever they were doing the photo shoots with the little nanotainer, one of Christian Holmes, Elizabeth's brother, friends who worked there, he flew the nanotainer to this photo shoot, and no one else was allowed to touch it except him and Patrick when they did the photo shoot. And just all this other lunacy. Like, they had all these rules about who could look at the branding that they were doing. They only were allowed to print it on this printer that was in like a locked room, and there was all these crazy things. But in the show, there's clearly no one that's portraying Patrick, because he has like quite a distinct look, and no one in that room looked like him. And the way that when Elizabeth left the room, they were kind of like looking at each other like, oh, another change. And really, it was only 2 or 3 of the people who were a bit lower down the totem pole that really said anything. So I do find that quite odd that he's not in the show, especially because he's in the HBO documentary. But again, it could be some sort of contract thing. But let me know if you've heard any reason as to why he's not in the show. So speaking of changes, one big change that was in the show was at the end when we see this Elizabeth Holmes jumping on the bouncy house at a Halloween party. It does seem like they've merged a lot of things here, because they had a party with a bouncy house, but it wasn't on Halloween, and they used to have a big Halloween party every year where everyone dressed up, and Elizabeth used to dress as like Queen Elizabeth and stuff. But at the end, she's dressed as, I'm assuming it's Mickey from Fantasia.
She's always been a fraud.
So I think this was a bit of the show's on Hulu, and in Europe the show's on Disney Plus, so they had to get a little Disney in there. I think it would have been smarter if they dressed her up as someone from Disney in the 90s, because that's what she would have seen growing up. So I did think that was an odd choice, like Mickey from Fantasia. But yeah, that was just one silly little change, and I will show you a clip of the real version of that, Elizabeth jumping on the bouncy house, just for your enjoyment. Very cringe, right? I mean, I'm gonna say that a lot in this video. So moving on to David Boyce, we see him really coming into Theranos in this episode, and as I've said a few times, he's one of the country's top litigators. They did mention in the show about Harvey Weinstein and also Al Gore. I've mentioned those before. He did also fight against California's Prop 8, the ban on gay marriage, and he did represent the survivors of Jeffrey, can't say last name, but you know who I mean. So he's involved in a lot of stuff. And they did also mention about him having his off the rack suits. He is known for wearing just like Old Navy suits and, you know, a $40 watch. He doesn't seem to care about that stuff. So I do think it's funny because he's, you know, absolutely loaded. Like, he makes about 10 million a year. He charges $10,000 an hour. And actually, in the case of Theranos, he took shares, as they said in the episode, and he did this in the 90s with WebMD, and he ended up making a ton of money off that. So with Theranos, he was given 300,000 shares at $15 a share, which comes out as 4.5 million. So he thought that this, you know, was going to be solid, and he really believed Elizabeth and thought that she was telling him the truth. And I'm sure they'll show it in the next couple of episodes, but he really has some gross tactics. Like, there's firms that he hires to like follow people, and I mean not like follow them for a day, like a year. He does some really not good things. So I'm sure we'll be seeing that in the next episode or two. And we also see him fighting the Fuse case in this episode, and that also was changed a bit because in real life Fuse and his sons were dealing with that case because they were involved in the Fuse company. And Fuse, actually, he used to be a CIA agent, believe it or not, and he really got into a bad situation with all this. Like, he was drowning in legal fees, like millions, and he ended up basically having to give up because if Theranos won and he was made to pay their attorney's fees, it would have like bankrupted him. He just couldn't deal with losing. And in Bad Blood, it actually said that when he lost, he just like had a bit of a breakdown. And that's when he reached out to Phyllis Gardner. So you start to see the little band of Theranos skeptics in this episode, and it's Richard Fuse, Phyllis Gardner, and then also Rochelle Gibbons joins them. And then later, the lab director of Theranos, who in Bad Blood is called Alan Beam, but it's really Adam Rosendorf, and they form the little skeptic band, and they reach out to John Carreyrou, who's the journalist who broke the whole story. And he also had someone at Pathology Blog, which was like a little blog about pathology that was written by Adam Clapper, and he's the one who really like started the ball rolling with Carreyrou. So I think next episode we have yet to meet Erica Chung, who's the other Theranos whistleblower with Tyler. So I think we'll meet her next episode, and then that's really, you know, our end run team. The only thing I'm not sure about is at the end of this episode, the way they introduced Mark, the lab director, that's Mark Pandori. They were kind of making that seem like, ooh, a big reveal, but I don't know whether they're going to use him as like the lab director, just because really Mark Pandori was only there for like 5 months. And when Alan Beam, Adam Rosendorf was there, they were there for a little bit of a crossover, and then he left. So I don't know whether they're going to just use Mark Pandori and not have the real like Adam Rosendorf who broke the story, because it could be some sort of, you know, he doesn't want to be in it. It's hard to know why some characters are in it and some aren't. Like Brendan Morris, there is no Brendan Morris. It's really Tony, this guy called Tony. So I don't know whether there's some deal with some people or not, but I would be surprised if they didn't have Adam Rosendorf in it, because like he's one of the big reasons that this all came out. So we'll see that next episode, I guess, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more from Fuse and Phyllis Gardner and Rochelle as well, because they really did do all that stuff too. Like they really didn't call Rochelle Gibbons. They really went in and took his laptop like the same day, and just things like that. It really shows you what they're like. So I hope that kind of gives a little more detail on the episode. You know, I can't unfortunately include absolutely everything. I wish I could, but my video would be like 5 hours long. So I do try and pack as much information in as possible. I will be back next week, and I'm also starting We Crash tomorrow, which will be covering WeWork and Adam and Rebecca Newman. So if you like this story, I'm pretty sure you'll like that one too. It's on Apple, and the first 3 episodes come out tomorrow, so I'll be covering those. And follow me on social media. I have a main channel where I focus on regular TV shows, and I have a Patreon, a merch store. Everything you could possibly need is listed in the description box down below. And as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.